It's going to be Frank Gaffney Jr. Unfortunately, his plane last night out of Washington was delayed 3 times and canceled, and he couldn't make it here on time. That's one of the reasons we gave the books. He was going to sell them, and he said, please give the books away. He is going to be here live by voice. What he's done is he's emailed his power presentation he was going to do today, and he's live on the voice. In other words, what you're seeing is the slides, but what you're hearing is him on Skype, his voice in that. And that's why at the end of the presentation, put your questions on cards. We'll ask him, and he'll give us the answers when you have answers about this. And today's is Ron Sharia. He is an expert in foreign policy, like immigration and Sharia law. And when I asked him to come here, and he agreed to it, he said, what should I speak about? And I said, the one that you thought was the most critical at the time we are on. So I expected immigration or something, Sharia law. And the book you have, he's the publisher and associate author of that. Anyhow, Frank Gaffney Jr. is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C. It's a not-for-profit, nonpartisan educational corporation established in 1988. Under his leadership, the Center has been nationally and internationally recognized as a resource for timely, informed, and penetrating analysis of foreign and defense policy matters. He's the host of Secure Freedom Radio, a nationally syndicated radio program heard weeknights throughout the country. And he's also the publisher and associate of Sharia, the Threat to Law. So I'm sorry he's not going to be here in body, but at least when you're watching this today, that's his actual voice from Washington, and there's no sound on the PowerPoints. You're hearing him talk about it, and as I said, so when we're finished, he's going to start right at noon, and after his presentation, as we have cards on the tables, write what your questions are on there, and then we will ask him from the back. We'll read the questions so everybody will know, and then he'll answer to it, so you'll be able to hear him answer. So I think you should find it interesting and very timely. Okay, keep talking. Anyhow, I'll see what I want to talk about. The border is not good, and that's where Joanne is down on a special meeting on that. And I'll just say my own feel on it is I'm very happy they called up the National Guard, but I think that they should be down on the border. And the talk about militarizing it, we should militarize the border, in my opinion. That's what's going to be necessary. So I appreciate Governor Perry calling it up. However, I think he didn't go far enough on it. And so Joanne and a lot of the Tea Party people are working. I know I was on some conference calls with some other people, and we were talking about it. And so we have to keep writing and talking to them about it, because I'm Texas Border Volunteers, and I can't say much about it because I'm not one of the authorized spokesmen. But let me tell you this, it's worse than ever down there. And I can talk to you individually and let you know what's going on. But we have to keep after our politicians on this, because we're being invaded.
Ashley?
Yes?
Could I ask you a question? Still a couple of minutes?
Yeah.
Do you think that the federal government nationalized 1,000 National Guard troops?
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
He's asking me if I think the federal government will nationalize the troops, because if the National Guard is put down there, the state has the right to do that, but then the federal government has the right to nationalize them. And so I think my own feeling on this, and obviously it's just my own feeling, is that I think Obama will wait and see what he makes use of them. I think if he put them down on the border, they would probably be nationalized very quickly. And so we have to see what happens on that. And Perry's thing then, he could call up the Texas Guard, which is not a federal thing. But Perry is in a situation that he wants to run for president. And so anything that he does is factoring into his decisions right now. You know, is it going to hurt it or help it? What do his main money backers, which are mostly from Texas, want? But it's something that obviously we are being invaded, and it remains to be seen, but it's a very critical thing. If you don't have borders, you're not a country. Yes.
What do you think of the proposed Berlin airlift of refugees from Honduras to this country that was announced yesterday?
I think it's awful.
What are we going to do about it?
Oh, she said, what do I think about the reverse Berlin airlift that was announced yesterday to bring them up from, I I think it was Honduras up here. I think it's awful because you're going to get half the world up here. And I will say, from being border volunteer, we catch people from a lot of areas. And the Hondurans and the El Salvadorans particularly, and Guatemalans also, come from a very, very violent culture. And a lot of these children that are coming up, a lot of them 10, 11, 12 are already gang members. And as far as when you capture somebody, or the Border Patrol does, if they're Hondurans or El Salvadorans, they're very much more careful because and this is, I'll say this very carefully. The people from those countries are the majority of the assaults that happen within Border Patrol. And that Border Patrol would deny that, but obviously we're very close to them. So you've got to look at where these people are coming around. They say it's a violent culture, but these people are part of that culture. And again, very young kids are in the gangs.
If a person is of the notion that those are children, they should disabuse themselves of that notion because they are not children. They're not children. They already have careers, like you said.
Yeah. Well, and when the government says children, that's anybody 17 and under. And a lot of people, I said the gang members are as young as 10, 11, but there are a lot of people that are 14, 15, 16 that are gang members. And they're catching a lot of them coming across the border. Yes?
Do you know when the next meeting is and what it's about?
The next meeting here? We're going to have a meeting in, I think it's the 15th of August, that is going to be on the border. And it's going to have Matt and Simpson, Representative Simpson here on that. The next one is the August 29th, and we're having Dr. Jeffrey Adicott from the Center on Terrorism and Violence at St. Mary's University. I've been trying to get him for about a year, and he is an expert on this. He's very difficult to get. He trains a lot of sheriff's departments all over the country, and he will talk about domestic terrorism and what's happening in Texas. And so that's August 29th. It's a Friday. It's the weekend before Labor Day, but the thing is, he's very hard to get up here. And so the other one is August 15th, which is Matt and then Representative Simpson.
Good afternoon. This is Frank Gaffney. I apologize that I am in Washington, D.C. instead of with you and Tyler. I had every intention of being there, but could not get on the plane last night. Series of misadventures, but I'm appreciative to you all for allowing me to participate in this fashion. I would like to go through with you fairly quickly a series of slides that I hope will illuminate a problem that I'm particularly concerned about, and I suspect many of you are as well, namely the sorts of challenges that we're facing at the moment in the world more broadly, but also here in the United States, including in Texas. And so the focus of this presentation is, I hope, going to be very directly relevant to you there in the great state of Texas, but also to you as citizens of our country at a moment when, as I'll show you in a second, there are a lot of things that are seriously wrong. And one of the troubles is that we're not quite clear why, many of us, and I want to see what I can do to help, as I say, do some dot connecting. So if we can go to the first slide, I'm going to show you basically a series of these that'll just, I hope, facilitate, the sorts of dots that we need to do some connecting on. This is, of course, a photo of three individuals who have led Egypt in recent days, including the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The question that I think a lot of us have had is, why did the United States government under Barack Obama contribute to, facilitate, in some cases one might say indeed enable, the overthrow of a guy who, with all of his imperfections, was nonetheless a fairly reliable ally of the United States, Hosni Mubarak, in favor of a guy who runs an organization, the Muslim Brotherhood, or was running as a president of Egypt on behalf of the political party of the Muslim Brotherhood. And even today, after he was removed from power by the Egyptian people overwhelmingly, we find the Obama administration diffident, shall we say, if not actually hostile to the al-Sisi presidency, and a much, much friendlier group of people who are now in power. So that's one dot. During the Morsi regime, of course, next slide if I may, you had evidence of how virulently anti-American it was by the fact that it allowed the U.S. Embassy in Cairo to be attacked on September 11th, 2012. If we go to the next slide, up the coast, meanwhile, Islamists who we had recently helped come to power were certainly positions of greater influence after helping to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, attacked the U.S. Special Mission Compound, as it was called, in Benghazi. And that resulted in, of course, the murder of our ambassador there, Chris Stevens, shown in this photograph, and 3 other Americans. The subject of now congressional inquiry with a select committee in the House of Representatives, finally. Interestingly enough, next slide, the following day, the president took to the Rose Garden and with Hillary Clinton at his side announced that what this was all about, this bloodletting in Benghazi, was a video that had prompted a mob that was demonstrating outside of this facility to go wild. At the time, the president knew that wasn't true, but he nonetheless said it. And in the next slide, we have him compounding the damage 2 weeks later at the United Nations, making a statement to the effect, quote, "The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam," unquote. Again, kind of picking up on the theme that it was the video's fault, and frankly, on the idea that we mustn't do things that offend Muslims. So a couple more dots there that I wanted to bring to your attention. Next slide. We have here a photograph of the kind of people that we have been supporting in Syria among Islamist elements, or at least groups that have sworn their loyalty to a sort of umbrella front known as the Al-Nusra Front, executing in cold blood their recently conquered adversaries. We have also, of course, of late had another entrant in this mix, a group that apparently, by some reports at least, we've also been training, called the Islamic State of Iraq and the Sham. It's been part of the Al-Nusra Front, it broke away from it, there's some rivalry between them, but the point is that we've been helping Islamists in Syria in their opposition to Bashar Assad's regime. Next slide. I think you're all familiar with the gang on top of this set of photographs. These are the 5 Taliban, another group of Islamists, senior officials and military leaders who President Obama turned loose in exchange for Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, who had been taken prisoner several years ago. The guys on the bottom, you may or may not recognize. I think you certainly get who the guy on the left is. The point of this is to display roughly the kind of stature that these folks have in Afghanistan relative to our own senior leaders. You have a governor, two governors actually, governor of Texas, governor of Pennsylvania. You have a former deputy director of the Central Intelligence Agency, a former senior White House communications officer, and the Army Chief of Staff. These are, in short, not just, your average run-of-the-mill jihadists who were detained in Gitmo. These are people of the first magnitude. Releasing them, even with a nominal house arrest in Qatar, is to have greatly enhanced the warfighting capabilities of the Taliban at a time when we are still engaged in conflict with them. Next slide, please. This is a somewhat arcane point, but I think its importance is going to become obvious in the course of the presentation. Back in February, the Obama administration announced that henceforth, just because you've engaged in limited material support for terrorism, would not preclude you from being able to come to the United States and gain refugee status. This is of grave concern at a moment when I think a lot of people who have been involved with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and are fearful of being punished there are looking for asylum, and evidently the Obama administration has in mind having them come here. Next slide, and I'll go through these rather quickly, but we had the administration releasing some 36,000 criminal illegal aliens. I heard you talking before I joined you about the problem with the invasion taking place across the border right now. Well, these are people who are already here, who were known to be criminal aliens, who were convicted in U.S. courts of some kind of criminal activity. They've been simply turned loose. Next slide. The administration has also created, having just been through the airport security exercise, this is particularly close to home, it's a kind of TSA pre-program, a fast-tracking for Muslims that it has engaged in what they call outreach with, even though they have had very dubious associations with the Muslim Brotherhood and other organizations. Lastly, the third slide there in that series, the administration has ordered the elimination from its databases, specifically the Immigration and Customs Enforcement watch list, of information about some of these Muslim Brotherhood type travelers. So even if it were not the case that we were fast tracking their arrival in this country, you would be hard pressed if you were one of the ICE officers to evaluate what a danger they represented to admit to the country, because the information about their behavior and their conduct and their practices has been deleted from the files. Next slide, the Palestinian front of what I think of as the war for the free world is much in the news at the moment, as you know. Recently, the guy on the left, the ostensible good guy in the Palestinian community, Fatah leader Mahmoud Abbas, has made common cause with the, at least heretofore, bad guy, Hamas leader Khalid Mashal, despite the fact that there are existing statutory prohibitions on the U.S. government having anything to do with Hamas. We are now sending funds to them. In fact, most recently, as you'll see in the next slide, we have actually sent about $47 million under the guise of humanitarian assistance from taxpayers to Khalid Mashal's Hamas, as we're trying to broker, in the person of Secretary Kerry, a ceasefire on the Gaza front at the moment. That ceasefire, by the way, I think it was the administration's intention to accelerate Israel's acceptance of it by basically closing down traffic into and out of the main international airport of Israel, Ben Gurion. Fortunately, your own Senator Ted Cruz injected himself and asked some hard questions and said until he got satisfactory answers about whose idea it was to shut down Ben Gurion, he was not going to let any more State Department appointments be processed by the Senate. and that apparently concentrated the mind of the State Department, and they decided that people could fly in and out of Big Bird after all. Just to give you sort of a sense, and I suspect many of them have been things you've been thinking about, or at least somewhat aware of, as evidence that, you know, something's not right here. The question next slide is, well, what is it? And the next slide suggests that, as I mentioned at the outset, we're not going to know unless we can find a way to connect these various dots rather than address them as kind of, you know, individual and unrelated issues. Next slide. I have here what I call a dot connector. This is a book, and I think we have some copies of it there for at least some of you. Again, I'm so sorry that I'm not there to sign them myself, and hope that we can get you more of them if you'd like. There's an online free downloadable version of this available if you don't want to spend the money on it, but would nonetheless like to get the book. The pictures on the left are 19 individuals who are the co-authors of this book entitled Sharia, the Threat to America, in an effort to provide, as I say, sort of an insight into the connective tissue between these kinds of issues, problems, developments, and policy challenges that we face. If books aren't your thing, next slide, we have a course available, also online, also for free, that is a 10-part, it's roughly 8 hours long, video-based sort of presentation that we put together to try to, again, help explain what it is we're up against and why. And I commend that to you. I'm going to give you sort of the highlights of both the book and this course in the next couple of minutes. So let me go to the next slide, please. Sharia is obviously featured prominently in both the course and the book. Let me help define what the term means. It is in Arabic, literally, the same word is used for the path, or on some accounts, the path to the water. It's meant to describe the way that Muslims are to proceed. Not all Muslims, and I want to emphasize this as strongly as I can, not all Muslims, certainly not in this country and not in other parts of the world, practice their faith in line with what Sharia dictates. And I will tell you that I think those who don't are not, at least for the moment, are not threats to our country. The problem is those that do adhere to Sharia actually are and need to be regarded as such. Next slide. This is a somewhat subjective judgment, but I think it's fair to say that roughly 10% of the body of what is thought of as Islamic law or Sharia involves the prescribed practices of the religion itself. You know, how many times you pray, in what way, in what direction, what you wash, what you eat, what you don't, and the like. The problem is not so much with that as it is with what's described in the next slide, which is the other characteristics of this 90% of Sharia. Notably, that it is a very comprehensive program. It is meant to govern all aspects of Muslims' lives and affairs, and it is of a totalitarian character. And people say Islamic law, it's no more than just law. It's really a political and military program as well as a legal one. Next slide, I'll just give you some of the highlights of what this means in practice. This poor chap is being flogged for having violated some tenet of Sharia, probably petty thievery. He's getting off light because other prescribed punishments involve amputations of various things. Next slide. This young lady, I'm sorry about the ghoulishness of this picture, but it appeared on the cover of Time magazine, so I figure we all better be able to accept it. You see some other things having been amputated. It's part of mutilating women, which is very much consistent with, if not actually obligatory, under Sharia's, well, misogynistic is the fancy term for it, but women-hating approach. It is obviously very much anti-constitutional. And next slide, and this is really the particularly worrying thing. The Sharia doctrine obliges its adherents to try to impose it worldwide. Fundamentally supremacist in character, it is something that is supposed to be inflicted upon Muslims, all Muslims, moderate and otherwise, as well as the true believers, and non-Muslims alike. Next slide. If I leave you really with one thought, this is the one I hope it might be. Sharia fundamentally is a problem because it is about power, not so much about faith. The good news, as we'll discuss, is that means that we can do something about it. If it's about faith, well, as you know, under our Constitution, faith means that it's to be respected, it's to be practiced in accordance with our freedom of religion. And there isn't a whole lot we can do about it. If it is about power, if it is basically about overthrowing the government and Constitution of the United States, well, that's sedition. That's illegal. We have ways of dealing with that. So that's why this is such a central tenet of my presentation. The next slide, please, is a feature of what you sometimes hear from Muslims if you get into this kind of discussion with them. Some will tell you that you don't really have anything to worry about because Sharia is actually completely consistent with the Constitution of the United States. In my experience, there are two possibilities when you find yourself hearing that from somebody of the Muslim persuasion. One is that they literally are ignorant of the nature of Sharia, have no idea what it entails, what it requires. More likely, if you're hearing it from somebody, particularly a person who is described as a leader of the Muslim faith in this country, they know exactly what you're talking about. And they know what they're telling you, that Sharia is consistent with the Constitution, is untrue. They're engaging in a practice that, again, is not just permissible under Sharia and its practice, but it's actually obligatory. You must lie for the faith, a practice known as taqiyya. Next slide. The preeminent practitioners of this Sharia supremacist program in the world today, I believe, are the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood is important in a number of respects, not least that it is the grandfather of basically all of the other Islamist entities in the world today, many of whom engage in violence to achieve the goal of imposing Sharia worldwide. But next slide, that's the very explicit stated purpose and objective of the Muslim Brotherhood as well, to achieve Sharia's triumph. And also to establish something we've been hearing a bit about it lately out of Iraq called the Caliphate, to rule according to Sharia globally. Well, next slide. If you think about it, that is, those two goals, I should say, are exactly the same as those of people like the folks photographed in this picture. On the right, the late and unlamented bin Laden, founder of Al-Qaeda, and on the left, his successor, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the now leader of Al-Qaeda. The only difference between the Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda, not about the goals, but about the tactics for achieving them. And as I'll discuss, even there, it is not always black and white. But Al-Qaeda believes basically that they can achieve their goal of destroying, enemies of Islam, forcing them to submit through violent means, which is the preferred technique, as Muhammad's life demonstrated, he being the perfect Muslim, according to adherent faith. But for the Muslim Brotherhood, they've got a slightly more nuanced line. They are of the view that if you are going to have a violent approach, that's all well and good. They don't object to it. It's just they want to see it used where it will be practical and effective. If they're not strong enough, the Brotherhood's doctrine is then use other techniques to achieve the same ends. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute, but I just want to make clear that whether you're talking about the folks in Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or the Islamic State or Jamaat al-Fuqra or Jamaat Islamiyya or the Tablighi Jamaat, any number of these entities, they all have the same goal of establishing Sharia worldwide and having a caliphate or some kind of theocratic government. The Shias have the same basic program. They call them something other than caliphates and caliphs, but the basic idea is the same. So next slide. Fortunately, we had breakthrough of great importance back in 2004 on a major artery not too far from where I live, the Chesapeake